Wah, 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 wah. We need that one. Your mission this week
Nobody
is to find
knows
that
that
gun.
stuff anymore.
Oh no,
Only
and we are the coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network. Well, at the bunker, the headquarters, the home of the Worldwide Coalition Radio Network, coalitionradionetwork.com, facebook.com/the Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at coalition_radio, and of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. Today is Friday, and yet somehow across the country there's not that we're missing that at 5 o'clock somewhere feeling today. It is Easter weekend. It is also the celebration, if you will, this week of a number of religious holidays. But making it even more serious is, again, the continuing situation we find ourselves here with regard to COVID, Corona. But at the same time, we must persevere as a nation, as a community, as a body politic. And there are issues that still remain unresolved pre-Corona, and these are issues we're going to have to continue to address. We don't cover the virus or the issues surrounding it, and particularly the politics around it, intentionally on the coalition. There are places out there that are hyper-focused on it. There are individuals out there in our polarized nation that are sitting there literally waiting for politicians to say something or do something that they can seize on and reply in capital letters, exclamation points, all sorts of deprecations, ad hominem attacks. We're simply not doing that here. The goal here is to focus on issues that may improve the response. The goal is to focus on issues perhaps that may prevent this sort of chaos and disorganization that we as a nation face right now going forward. But also, again, to focus on the issues that have been with us all along. And no one has been more focused on issues of the environment, of the politics surrounding the environment, the industrialization of the environment, the environmental industrial industry, if you will, as well, is my next guest. He is a frequent offender to the coalition. He was instrumental in the defeat of what we love to say here is Invenergy. He has been a professional filmmaker and environmental advocate. He is the executive director of the Burrowville Land Trust, and of course, he is Paul Roselli. Paul, welcome back to the Coalition 3.0.
Oh, thank you, Pat. Thank you. 3.0, what does that mean? You've improved.
Well, it's the first version you wouldn't recognize. It was a panel discussion, a handful of really great people. We started out at 990WBOB.com. We were there just a little bit of time. Sure. Then we moved to AM 790, which is what we call 2.0, was radio, true over the airwaves radio. Version, well, actually, I guess we're on 4.0. 3.0 is when we went.
4.0, yeah. I think 4.0.
Video, we went with the fine folks at Go Local Prov, and now here we are at our own facility. So there you go, buddy.
That's great. I want to take a minute and thank you for all, you keep on mentioning about that mysterious Chicago-based company that came to the Northwest Woods.
Right.
And you keep on mentioning it. I want to thank you for all the work you did over these last, and I still can't believe it, 4+ years of trying to fight that monster. We did it. We did it because of a statewide effort, because of people like you, so many people, but getting that word out in a constant drumbeat. That's what you're good at. That's what the Coalition Radio is good at. We hope we never experience that type of thing again. However, I think we're experiencing something now that has some implications directly tied to that Chicago-based company that came knocking on our doors. Almost, matter of fact, in August it'll be 5 years.
Wow.
It was August 1st, 2015, when our current governor said these famous words to the folks from Invenergy. She said that our governor said that we will do everything we can to make sure you're successful here. And we did everything we could to make sure they weren't. And guess who won?
The people. Literally the people. but
Yeah, really.
and I appreciate your kind words. It's there is a great tradition now of independent media here in Rhode Island. Steve Alquist, the Coalition, Tony Jones, a bunch, Providence News. There's probably a dozen, 24 players, if you will, who in the aggregate, I believe, really represent a real cross-section of the concerns of Rhode Islanders. Some of them focus on the economics, some of them focus on the social, others are political, and then organizations like ours are a hybrid, but ultimately amplifying the lunch pail issues, the philosophical issues that really concern Rhode Island, not using their forum, their 200 or 300-year-old forum, to try and tell Rhode Islanders what they should be concerned about. And there's a key difference there. There's a connection to the community. Again, you see someone like Steve Alquist all over the place. The virus, the plague, as we call it here, has not slowed him down a bit. It's not going to slow us down. We're actually trying to move to a 6 or 7 day format here. Later on tonight, after your appearance and another guest, we'll have open line talk radio, true call-in talk radio format going on 4 or 5 nights a week from 9 p.m. till whenever the lines quiet down and whenever your host actually passes out. So it's a different world, but these are challenging times. There you go.
And it's interesting. We've been talking a lot about. Matter of fact, the conversation has been for the last month or so about COVID-19 and how it's impacting everything, and certainly some of the things that you and I are going to discuss tonight has had a profound impact on it. But it's done one thing, and I hope we talk about this a little bit more as we go through my time with you. Is that it's really shown us what a crisis looks like, whether it be an economic impact, whether it be social impact, environmental impact, education, industry, whatever it is, you name it. Everything from unemployment checks to congregating outside of our own homes. It really has galvanized this idea of that, 6-letter word, crisis. We are in a crisis, and we're in a crisis that was predicted and predictable, and now we may be in store of another crisis, an environmental crisis, a climate crisis that also is predictable and predicted. So I'm sure we'll talk about that as we go through the evening. But it's actually been in spite of everything, or maybe because of it, and certainly when people lose their lives because of a disease, it's a horrible nightmare for families and loved ones. That should tell us something. That really should, when it comes to the environment. And I think I think that there's a celebration that's coming up, 50th anniversary of Earth Day. Who would have thought that what was started 70 years ago? 1970, 50 years ago.
Right.
How old was I? I was 17 when this started. I'm not 17 anymore, and here we are 50 years later. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's. I was 10 years old at the time. My older sisters were in high school and just out after high school at college when this sort of amazing awakening took place around the nation. And it was the awakening was delivered to us by so many different methods. You're talking about then really the golden age of television. Advertising at that point in time wasn't so manipulative. It was very thoughtful. Quite frankly, a tear shed by a single Indian had the ability to really change an entire nation's perspective of folks who might not have been attuned to what was going on. It was a generation that was reacting, if you will, to societal constraints, exploring a lot. And clearly the relationship with the earth was one of the areas that they looked to explore. And it seems almost so quaint now, given issues like Invenergy, fracking being seen as a societal good in order to achieve some type of economic hegemony. I mean, it just it's so much more complex now, but the issues are still the same, aren't they?
Yeah, the issues are still the same. What started out as what was supposed to be an educational day to educate folks about the hazards of using, at that time, things like DDT and insecticides for lawns and spraying without reservation. Also, the destruction of our forests. You have to think what was going on 50 years ago. A lot of extraction was going on, probably more so then than now, except for this thing called fracking. But coal was a big deal. Forests were being decimated. The environment was being looked at as just like it was way back in the 16 and 1700s, as a nuisance. Had You could see over the horizon, the forests were everywhere, plants, uh, life was everywhere, and when the folks from overseas came over way back in the 1600s, they saw it as an opportunity, and that has carried forward all the way to 1970 when this movement started. We've gotten a little better over the years. We've at least thought about it. What came out of that 1970 educational day were things that we now take for granted: the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the Endangered Species Act. All of those things came out of that first foray into this thing called environmentalism, thinking about the environment, looking at how we as humans interact with it. So it was really an exciting time. Here we are 50 years later, and the question I get a lot of is, well, how can we possibly celebrate this event in this time of crisis, this time of pandemic? Why should we pop a cork or pour a glass of champagne, or in this case, go plant a tree or pick up some litter, or continue to do the advocacy work that we should be doing? Why do we do that in a time of crisis? I would proffer this, and I want you to come back at me and let's pick apart what's going on, because the other side, and I hate to describe it that way, but the other side is moving full steam ahead. A lot of environmental regulations are being either weakened or dismissed entirely. The portions of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act have starting to be dismantled. Things like the Endangered Species Act is being challenged in terms of animals and native species on the plains and out west, and also locally too. Our gas standards statewide have been decreased to allow the oversupply of winter fuel that hasn't been used yet before they switch over to the spring and summer fuel. So the winter fuel is a little bit more lax in terms of its emissions. So things like that, and then the constant drumbeat from the folks in Washington D.C. about bolstering up the fossil fuel industry. Not that we want to put anybody out of work, but there's been no discussion about a transformation or transitioning to something else. So with all that going on, it's my belief and many others that we should celebrate it. We should keep this idea of environment and climate change and advocacy top of mind, for a lot of reasons, but also because the other side is pushing their agenda as hard and fast as possible.
I guess where I'd like to start is let's celebrate the fact that, first of all, Americans are cognizant that these issues even exist. There was so much that happened in the 60s, really in the run-up to the very first Earth Day. I mean, look at the way we waged war around the world. We deforested entire nations, it would seem like, using vicious chemicals like napalm against entire groups of indigent people, regardless of their politics. The infamous phrase, "In order to save the village, we had to burn it," grew out of that time. There was a studied ignorance about how we left what we left behind us. The notion that you could do a chemical, basically just toss stuff out the back window. You think about our childhood. How many cans of paint, how many thinners, how many this, how many that, ended up in a gutter, in a rain gutter, and then ultimately ended up in, well, I didn't grow up around here as you did, but ultimately ended up in a bay or in groundwater somewhere. How many facilities still, many of which ironically are owned and were built by our federal government, are still dirty as hell. But at the same time, when you look at other parts of the world, and that's not to rationalize or engage in some sort of exercise in moral relativism, knowing what we also now know about the profound impacts of that, we still have other nations around the world. I mean, if you look at what's happening in various parts of Central Asia, for example, in terms of the production of our high-tech world, what that's done in terms of mining for rare earth, in terms of plastics, in terms of just smoke-filled skies that are reminiscent almost of an Oliver Twist novel. The fact that we managed to do so much better here, I think, is cause for celebration.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that. So one of the side benefits of everybody staying home and not driving, I know a few people who have asthma, and many of them have told me that they've never felt that their lungs have never felt so good because of the less amount of pollutants that are in the air, the amount of soot and dust from exhaust pipes, also just the amount of other gases, unburned gasoline, carbon monoxide. So all of those things, it's been interesting to see those kind of changes. I'm going to read a quote because I've been trying to understand, not only from myself but from others, how something like this can impact. This one comes from George Bernard Shaw. For those of you who know George Bernard Shaw, this might be something that you remember. He said, "Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." And I read that, and I've plastered it on my computer screen here for this conversation, because that truly is where we should begin. All of these changes, we're always thinking about, even in our celebration, we're always thinking about what the feds can do, what the state can do, how big government or small government or local government can have an impact, and they certainly can. They can certainly change, set the tone. They can make laws and regulations that help businesses and individuals move in a certain direction. But it's going to come down, it always comes down to the individual, how you react to this natural world, what you bring in. I'm not trying to be preachy or anything, but right. But in the end, what Mr. Shaw said, those who cannot change their own minds cannot change anything. And I think that's where we have to start.
Well, and I think that's a very valuable point that actually neatly fits in with both of our philosophies. I've thought a lot about this recently too, since we started talking last week. And what's troubling to me is, while we celebrate, and by the way, all you have to do is look at a picture of the Los Angeles skyline and see that you can actually see the Los Angeles skyline to understand what a fundamental change this is. But to your point, whereas governments can make regulations, governments, there's a certain game of environmental whack-a-mole that's going on around the world, which is the United States clamps down, chases out polluters, goes after companies responsible for Superfund sites, you name it, and it pops up somewhere else. I believe that to truly affect fundamental change, that the goods that are so harmful to our environment, and some of them are quite egregious, and quite frankly, I'm surrounded by electronics that are just, if I think we would both be appalled how if we saw that where they were built in what manner. But in one sense, they represent a remarkable evolution of human thought and human-driven technology. But at the same time, the United States, while we celebrate the fact that you can swim in places like Boston Harbor now that you haven't been able to in a very long time, or the fact that species are starting to return to parts of America that haven't seen them in some cases in generations. Our American economy, the way that it works right now, is essentially we offshore, and I'm going to use offshore as a verb here, we offshore the production of so many things that are so harmful to the environments that actually build them. And the two things that come to mind, and it's just as a result of public policy, all of our electronics. I talked about mining for rare earth. That's a hideously destructive process. And in order to meet market demands, they've been pushed over again to Central Asia, and the production of which takes place along the Asian Rim. Drugs, our public policies here. Think back to the Prohibition crisis in the 1920s, where most of the liquor, the if you will, the mechanics of said crisis were manufactured in the United States. Well, in the case of the war on drugs, what we've done is our policies, our appetite for drugs has driven them offshore to Latin and Central America, where they've wreaked societal havoc as well as environmental havoc, something not often reported. I guess my question to you is, I firmly believe that in order to really, that mystic goal of harmony with the environment, the true push has to come from the consumer. The consumer needs to understand the impact of their choices and needs to make a decision to change the demand in the marketplace to products that are more environmentally friendly.
Sure, and I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's part of it. But here's where government can play a decisive role. And it's interesting, you talk about Asia or the Asia Rim, or the Asian Rim. So at 65 years old, I went back to school, and I'm still in a master's program at Bryant University on what's called global environmental studies.
Wow.
And one of the topics that I studied was environmental policy. What countries have how do they deal with environmental policy? We studied Germany, France, and China, and a number of other places too. China's environmental policies are probably the strongest anywhere on the planet. They're not enforced. There's a lot of exceptions, but on the books, they're probably some of the strongest around. A lot of them were based on U.S. policy, because ours over the years have become stronger because we went through that period of pre-industrialization, then industrialization, and now we're somewhere at the tail end of it. But the policies that other countries use, or at least subscribe to, are very strict and very severe. It's the enforcement part of it. It's also what happens afterwards. And I would challenge you and anybody who's listening to go back over the last 2 years in our own General Assembly and try to find one environmental law or legislation that was passed that got out of committee, went to the governor's desk, got out of committee in both branches, both the Senate and the House, went to the governor's desk, and the governor signed it. One piece of environmental or climate change policy. And over the last 2 years, there's been none. And now that the House and the Senate have disappeared for what looks like the remainder of the session, and if they do come back, environmental policy is going to be way, way, way down on the list. And
Right.
and it looks like we're not going to get anything done this year as well, which is really a shame, because I think I think that's where government can shine. There was some good legislation about efficiency standards, about appliances that were going to be more energy efficient. There was the Climate Change Act, which mandated the emissions reductions. There was some other good environmental policies that were on the boards, in discussion, in the committees, all set for at least a vibrant, robust discussion. And the chances were that some of them were going to become laws of the land. One of the unfortunate consequences, unintended, I'm sure, was this coronavirus that came along and pretty much just canceled everything, both in the House and the Senate. It's a shame, but my feeling is, and I hope this feeling is universal throughout the state. At least I would like to think it's widely shared. Is that once people come back, they will realize that this is what a crisis looks like. This is what it is. It's a disruption, an entire disruption. I mean, we're talking about a virus. We're talking about a virus and the human population. Imagine something on the global scale of a climate crisis, where not only humans, but just about every aspect of our life is being challenged, whether it be soil, air, water, plant life, all agriculture, all the things we depend on, not only for our own species, but all the other species that live on this planet. Imagine what that crisis would look like. So I'm really hoping that maybe it's not this year, maybe next year, when the pandemic truly subsides and we can get back to some kind of normalcy, that the House and the Senate and the Rhode Island legislature come back and start the hard work, the really hard work in making sure that many of these pieces of legislation continue to go through, continue to be vetted by all the stakeholders, and become legislation, because that's the only way we're going to make any change here, right? Just like George Bernard Shaw says, those who cannot change their own minds cannot change anything. So first, we got to change ourselves. Second, we got to change the House and the Senate, get them to understand that this is what a crisis looks like, and then move ahead, because we can't look back. The last 50 years of environmentalism under Earth Day have been ups and downs. We now need to ramp this up as quickly and as sanely as possible.
Now, you know what the first objection is going to be, and that, of course, is we are going to go through a period now, and as you can imagine, it makes me insane, where the government is openly talking about how the government is going to turn the economy back on. Now, I don't even know where to go with that. So deep is that the stupidity in that statement. The government has nothing to do with it
now. You don't have to think about next year or the year after, or even in this fall. It's happening right now. The oil industry wants to. We have the federal government saying that we're going to bolster the oil industry, make sure they get as much of the dollars that they used to get, maybe get a little bit more.
If I can make a suggestion to the entire environmental movement, the first thing that they need to do, because no one on the commercial side is going to do it for them, is really try to make accessible and articulate the level of subsidies that carbon-based energy already gets. The folks often talk about, well, we're subsidizing solar. We're subsidizing everything. We're finding out right now that we're subsidizing milk, and milk and eggs are getting thrown out, despite the fact that people are literally in parts of America subsistence living.
Absolutely, and for the fossil fuel industry, it's in the tax code. They get a tax write-off. It's built into the tax code. We don't have to worry about giving them more money as subsidies. It's in the tax code. To change that, you need the proverbial act of Congress, and right. And I don't know if that's going to come. I don't know. That's going to be a hard one.
You see, the interesting thing about being a free market guy like I am, I actually want the markets to be free and self-supporting for everybody. including, I mean, look at this in the past few weeks. We've just announced the notion that the airlines are eligible for
Right.
2 weeks. 2 weeks. I am supposed to believe that a handful of weeks of drama are going to eliminate, if you will, 10 years of record profits in with all sorts of subsidies, again, in the tax code, in terms of how government it's ludicrous. To me, the first step is allowing forms of energy to be competed for in the free market. And in doing so, I am firmly convinced that people who are innovative, people who are technology driven, will continue, I believe, to look for forms of energy that are price driven, but also simultaneously without the legacy cost that big oil and big natural gas has left us with. Because the other thing that needs to be done in a business environment is actually quantify the cost, these legacy costs, as I put it, of fracked gas and of coal, and because the legacy costs are tremendous, whether it be everything from generations of health care benefits to folks who are involved in the production of it, the tax incentives that were handed out to create winners in one category that weren't available to other people in other industries, the environmental waste that was left behind by companies who were able to just walk away because the government is going to clean up everybody's mess. There is no residue left over anymore of that sort of, what do they call it, the behavioral hazards associated with failure. That doesn't matter anymore. We're all the cry of everyone from Gina Raimondo to every big energy producer is, let's move forward, right? Let's move forward. We don't need to think about those pesky details of it. So I beg folks in the environmental movement to perhaps step away from emotion just a little bit, because a lot of these groups are emotionally driven, which I understand. I empathize with that. But start hitting the American consumer with just how much they're really paying for a gallon of gas, how much they're really paying for electricity in the forms of all these subsidies. I beg you guys to do that.
Yeah, it's a hard one, and it requires an enormous amount of time and effort and capacity.
Right.
I'm a volunteer. For a.
You've already changed our world here. Yeah, you can't. I don't expect you to do it.
In the northwest corner of Rhode Island, but we took on big industry. We took on a $1 billion power plant, and along with the skillful efforts of so many people, particularly the attorneys, both at the local level and the state level and the regional level, we took it on and we beat them. And we did it because of environmental policy that was already on the books. And I think that's where we need to be. I volunteer because of the love of the environment, because of all the things that we associate with that, the calmness, the spiritual nature, the relaxing qualities, whether you fish or hunt, or just take a walk in the woods. That's what keeps me involved in all of this. I grew up in Providence. I grew up almost right between 146 and 95, what's now known as the North End of Providence. And my world was my backyard. And way back in 1983, I moved to this part of the planet, this northwest corner of Rhode Island, because I wanted more. I wanted more of just about everything, the trees and the bugs and the animals and whatever you can give me, just keep on giving it to me. And I think what we have to do is to keep on going with that dream, that philosophy. I'm going to read another quote if I can, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
This comes from Kurt Vonnegut Jr. Kurt says, "I really wonder what gives us the right to wreck this poor planet of ours." And boy, there is such wisdom in that brief statement of what gives us the right. Why somewhere as we developed as creatures on this planet? What was it that said that we can build a solar farm and clear cut 300-400 acres of forest? What is it among us? What is it in our psyche? What is it in our economy? What is in the incentives that lead to that type of destruction of a natural world? I'm not sure, but imagine the other way around. Imagine the other way around. Imagine if all the incentives, and as you say, educating the consumer, making sure all the policies are more of a disincentive for the pollution of the air and water rather than an incentive to do so.
Right.
So what would that world look like? Even in your free market scenario, Pat, you still have to come up with a philosophy, some guiding principles. What's a free economy? I don't know. If there weren't a free economy, what does that picture look like? And I'm really asking you. I really want to know. What's that free economy if people go out and don't destroy the planet? So what is that? Tell me.
Well, first off, again, it relies on folks who are in the marketplace to start competing. And a lot of this has to come from social pressure, because ultimately I don't believe that even with regulations, despite the fact that we've got some pretty strict laws, we still have new Superfund sites being created. We still have all these market subsidies for an inefficient, literally dinosaur age fuel. All of this still happens because ultimately people will twist government and will twist the rules to suit their own needs. In a true free market economy, you've got folks competing on, if you will, their ability to not only to out-innovate and create a product, but to appeal to individuals' demand for a product that is environmentally sound, and a product that was built by people who are environmentally conscious. In the absence of that, folks will always opt for products from a newer, cheaper market. The China now is going through a number of pressures.
Why?
First of all, what's that?
But why? But why? But let's say that you had a product. I have two iPhones, a really tiny one and a much bigger one. And the only reason I bought the much bigger one, it's brand new and it's got a lot more whistles and bells. The little one with the new software upgrade does practically all the same things as this big one. What if that device becomes like a Tesla, where they just upgrade the software and it's like getting a brand new car? What if our philosophy, our principles were geared towards that? Even in a free market society, under your supervision, Pat, you're the ruler of the free market world.
But there is no ruler in a free market. That's the point. Yeah. But you raise a legitimate concern. So you've got, if you had a market that was geared towards enhancement as opposed to replacement, I think that's what you're trying to say. Okay. So that everything is in a throwaway. This Galaxy S8 that I bought 2 or 3 years ago, which has literally survived trips to the Mexican desert, has survived the inner cities of New York City and the New York City subway system, and any one of a variety of hazardous conditions, not the least of which is having to reside in my pocket. As I engage in my day-to-day behaviors, I've held on to it for economic needs, but certainly the new S10, S12, whatever, is, brighter brights, whiter whites, right? So the only folks who can have a real impact on the marketplace is the accumulation of demands by individual consumers. And I'll say that for a couple of reasons. First of all, some of most are egregious polluters, if you will, both financially and in terms of the actual physical environment, are companies that are publicly held. Ironically, some of those same companies that are publicly held are held, have represent a substantial presence of institutional investors. An amazing amount of those institutional investors are folks in public labor unions. So, as important, as great as it would feel to have government place increasing demands, the reality is that it's only in the education of the public to understand that their buying choices have real impact. That you will start to, and you've seen that in certain products. You've seen that in the way that people are approaching dairy products, for example, now. One of the biggest challenges of the dairy industry is the fact that folks are for product reasons, are literally changing the way they drink. I mean, you and I were handed cartons of milk for a generation. I drink oat milk now. And by the way, I'm the libertarian who drives an electric car. So So I do so because they are superior products and offer superior value, while I simultaneously understand that these have the potential in the overall balance. Because one of the great controversies about almond milk, for example, is the sheer amount of water that's used in the production of almond milk. One of the great controversies about solar power, as wonderful as it is that for whatever reason, folks are resorting to clear-cutting fields to put it in, as opposed to a conversation you and I have had a couple times, which is the fact that we've got millions of square feet of empty roofs around Providence with buildings that are just built in the 18th century that could easily incorporate solar and have an instant impact on society. Government has always failed. In fact, despite the best, I'll say it this way, despite their best, I believe, I'm going to take the high road. I'm going to say that the folks who are looking to impact these regulations on industries only have best interests at heart, and a lot of them do. They want to see clearing of water. They want to see an environment that's based on that's moving away from fossil fuels and using renewable energy. All right, but ultimately, and this is the challenge: if the consumer doesn't accept it, we live in a world driven by millions of individual choices that are made every day. And
every day.
And the irony is that some of the very people that have the ability to make these changes at the highest corporate level are actually report to the very people who need to really make the change, which is the individual consumer, because they're part of these, vast pension plans and part of these vast organizations that own all these companies. So I believe that the real effort has to be made. And it's hard. The fact that we have a TV monitor in this in our studio here that we pay. Joel, how big is the screen? Was it 27 inches or something? It's a TV that was with what was it? Not we got the 720p. What's the next one? All right, so we have a 720p TV that's made of brilliant molded plastic. All sorts of rare earth was used in the electronics inside of it. I can't even imagine what the manufacturing process was like for the front screen.
For the most part, most of that stuff is non-recyclable. You just have to throw it away.
Right, and you know what? And the worst part is in a year when this thing breaks, because it will break in a year. We're not talking about RCA here. All right, I will. If I will think of you now before I do this, but rather than recycle it, I will probably just put it in the trash and it will end up in a landfill. And the reason that's happening is because it's government subsidized production. It's done by tiger economies in newer, stranger parts of the world where you can pay someone 50 cents an hour or 20 cents an hour. Sure. God only knows what. So people have to understand the implication of that decision. It's the same argument, and I'll come up for air in a second here, but the same argument always takes place in communities where it used to be Walmart. Walmart would go into a community and would devastate local retail. Well, the reason why it devastated local retail was because local retail was, as the kids say, hella expensive, had limited choices, and didn't really serve what they wanted. So Walmart came along and blew up downtown America. Now, here's the irony. You know who's taking a chunk out of Walmart? Are these dollar stores, which just have some terrible products there with predatory, but people are making those decisions to support them with their wallet and their feet. And
it's a tough one, and I don't want anybody to get discouraged that it's not. I mean, all these decisions that we all like you said, everybody makes a million decisions every day,
right.
and those decisions do have an impact. It's one of the things that I want to get back to the celebration,
right?
Because Earth Day,
absolutely. Let's celebrate something, buddy.
right? And the idea of a celebration in a time of a pandemic, I think, is not only appropriate but necessary.
Right.
And in spite of what else is going on in the higher levels of political fiefdom, way over there in D.C., we do have to continue to advocate. We do have that the fight is never over, and for someone who's been in this fight for about 30 years, doesn't surprise me every day to learn of a new challenge, and we have to keep fighting for those things. One of the things, if I can put a plug in for the land trust.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things that we
maybe just take a second, if you will, and just bring people up to date who may not have heard you before on the show or may not see you, because we have a little bit more aggressive forms of distribution here. Tell folks, give a brief commercial for what the Burrillville Land Trust is, what they represent, and sure, what their normal activities are.
Yeah, normal. So the Burrillville Land Trust is an all volunteer private land trust in the town of Burrillville. We're not connected with the town. We're private. We own about 218 acres of land in the town of Burrillville. Our mission is to preserve and protect the rural character of the town of Burrillville through education, advocacy, and acquisition. We're authorized by the state of Rhode Island to acquire property. We buy it. Sometimes it's transferred, sometimes it's willed to us, sometimes people just are tired of paying the taxes and they give it to us, and then we manage that in a way that pretty much leaves the land alone. So these 218 acres, for as long as we're around, and as long as there still is a rule of law here in the United States, right, those properties that we own will be protected forever. They will transition just the way land always transitions. Trees will live, they'll die, animals will come, will go, species may change, the course of rivers and streams may change, the water quality might be different. But in essence, that forest or that piece of property will always be around within those boundaries as protected property. That's what a land trust does. There are 39 towns and cities in the state of Rhode Island. We have about 44 land trusts in the state of Rhode Island. Half of them are municipal land trusts, which means that the town organizes and puts people on those boards. And then half of those land trusts, the other half, are private land trusts, just like the Burrillville Land Trust. We started around 1999 with the idea of trying to preserve some property, those special places that everybody cared and loved to look at and drove by every once in a while and wanted to see protected. We've morphed over the years to not only doing that, but doing more advocacy work and education work, as well as acquisition. Our advocacy came to a highlight during the last 4 years when we took on the challenge of trying then to stop a power plant coming into the rural forest of the northwest corner of Rhode Island. To celebrate, how was that? Was that pretty good? Did I give a good?
No, that was outstanding. I particularly enjoyed the part where you said you guys were privately organized using private. Which is, I believe, a brilliant solution to a challenging issue, which is folks want to preserve open spaces. against the pressure of ongoing development. Folks coming together through voluntary acts of contribution, donation, all the methods you described are, to me, idyllic, because it's individuals coalescing around a central issue to solve a problem that they perceive in the development and the path forward for their community. That is, you didn't know you were a libertarian, did you? But go ahead. But that was voluntary.
Not until now. Sorry.
But so it is, it is, even in the most difficult of times, we need to celebrate the big and the little things. We need to acknowledge the passing of time. And it's important that, particularly in times of crisis, that traditions, observances still be met. When you think of, the fact that children are having their birthday parties over Zoom, that's the best and worst of things that happen to me. Because you know what? There is nothing like the delight in an eye of a child who's celebrating a birthday. It is just, it's magic. And as pressing as all these concerns may be, whether it be the surrounding the household of that child, or in the case of the environment, all the economic issues, everything that's boiling around us, it's more important than ever to celebrate the victories. Absolutely, it's absolutely appropriate. It's necessary. That's my thought.
Yeah, and those traditions certainly should happen. My daughter is pregnant, and she and her husband will have their first child sometime in July. And I booked a flight, but I'm not even sure if I'll be able to fly out there come July. I sure hope so, or else I'll be sitting in front of a screen, and instead of talking to you, Pat, I'll be talking with her and her husband and their newborn. It won't be the same, but that's the way it is in a crisis. That's what happens in a crisis. Yeah, celebration. So the land trust was going to have a month-long celebration of Earth Day. We were going to do a lot of live events, concerts, talks on solar energy. I was going to do some cooking demonstrations, a walk in the woods. We'd had a couple of hikes planned. All of that disappeared about the middle of March. And so now we're moving everything online. We've decided that we should still celebrate. We should still give people an opportunity to stare in front of this monitor, this screen, and interact with people who are like-minded, to give them some hope and appreciation for the outside world, particularly around here. The northwest corner of Rhode Island is one of those places that really is truly unlike any other place in Rhode Island. Our understories, our understory, in other words, the growth of trees and bushes that are under the canopy of these very tall pines and oaks. There's nothing like that. Our natural springs and vernal pools. And if you ever come up to go to George Washington Management Area, Pulaski Park, Black Hut, some of the land trust properties, you'll see that unique quality of a New England forest that you won't see elsewhere in Rhode Island. The South County folks south of Providence, they have their own environment. From about the North Providence line on up, it's different. And that was one of the characteristics. That was one of the things we talked a lot about when we were fighting against the big energy and the power plant. So we're moving all of these events online, and I'll tell you, it's a lot more challenging than doing a live event. A live event, you show up. Here on this virtual world, you got to do tech support. You got to register people. You got to download information, download apps. You got to make sure if anybody wants any files or any type of information, you correspond with them back and forth, back and forth. Oh my goodness, it's a full-time job. I don't know why we did it this way, but we're doing it this way because we want to celebrate. We want to make sure that this this idea of the environment stays top of mind with people, because the other side is fighting as hard as they can to deregulate, to get rid of the regulations, to lower the standards as much as possible, and we need to keep this fight going, and we're going to do things like we'll talk about solar sighting. We'll talk about backyard birds. We'll go for a hike, a virtual hike. We'll go for a hike. We got 2 live concerts coming up, a couple of cooking shows. My time with you today is our kickoff event. Yay, Pat! Where's the confetti? You know, this is our kickoff event. So we purposely did that because we wanted to make sure that people understood that yes, there's a crisis going on. There's this thing called a pandemic. There's a virus that is worldwide, impacting all segments of society, every single one of them. Birthday parties, births, a whole bunch of other things, the economy, the environment, social interactions, everything. But, and maybe because of it, we need to have this celebration. So it's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. The official day is April 22nd. It's a Wednesday.
Yep.
Coming up, I think, 10 days from now, 12 days from now. Go outside, applaud your nearest tree and plant, say thank you, yay, tree. I took out not a very healthy arborvitae a couple of weeks ago, and I planted today. I finally put it in the hole, a holly, and I'm
Nice.
really excited about these hollies that I bought, and they're gorgeous, and that's what we should all do. By the way, they're deer resistant, just in case you were wondering. So that's what we need to do.
Yeah,
And I want you to come. I want you to come, Pat, virtually, or I guess that's the only way now. But I want to make sure you attend as many of these as possible.
Well, particularly the ones that are.
You've attended a lot of these events that we had up here over the years.
No, it's a blast. It's great people.
Yeah.
You know, it's a wonderful community. It's a spectacular setting. All the more so by the sweet taste of victory, or as we like to say in the Libertarian Party, the salt of the tears of the CEO of Invenergy are delicious to me. But you know, I also want to offer, you know, if you've got videos or things like that you looking for a host to replay them, we've got in our new facility here, we've got the opportunity to load up these videos. You're a professional filmmaker. I'm sure some of the stuff's going to be gorgeous. We'd love to put them up here and share them with people in Rhode Island so they get an understanding of why folks fought so hard to hold on to what they have in Burrillville, which is a wonderful community, great people in a spectacular setting. And then again, use that as an opportunity to make a statement. You know, you've talked about some of the events being educational. To me, right now, at this right moment in history, if there is any, and I won't even call it an upside, if there's any, and I wouldn't even want to call it an opportunity, if there is a moment to be had where folks can because in times of crisis, people look out to these exogenous events and they're more open to understanding why they happen. And as a result, folks are more open. To your point, as you quoted Mr. Shaw, I believe, he talked about, you know, the ability to change. Right now, seeing crisis and failure surrounding them, there are more people, I believe, are open to change and a rethinking of literally how they approach everything in life in ways that I don't think was possible. To say that the last great national crisis was literally 9/11. To say, and I lost friends in 9/11. So when I say this, I believe it has meaning. This eclipses 9/11 on a scale that, horribly enough, I didn't think any of us would thought it was possible. Just on the sheer loss of life and the sheer fundamental attack, if you will, this represents on the way we live. So people I believe you've got an audience that's some of the great enlightenings, if you will, in human history took place after exogenous events that shook that society as it existed at that time to its very core. And
Well,
people,
I hope so. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So I hope you'll share those events with us. I'd love to put up a schedule up online of what you're doing. So even if folks can only participate virtually, they'll have that opportunity. Folks have a lot of time on their hands right now, and it's interesting to see who's trying to use it well, who's not. There's a great meme out on the internet about a guy crashed down on his couch, and I think the meme goes something effective: 2019 lazy loser, 2020 national hero because he's on his couch. But you know what? There's great opportunity in moments like this, and it's how we to use perhaps one of the most overused cliches in our culture, how we seize that day, that I believe will differentiate us to our children and our children's children. Did we simply sit idly by and worry about whether or not we could get, Dancing with the Stars, and could we, what was going to happen to the XFL? Were we able to not get the brand of Cheetos that we wanted? Or did we use this moment as an awakening to rethink literally everything? And I'm hoping and I'm sensing that there are a lot of people out there who are questioning literally everything. And I believe only good can come from that. But that's me.
Well, I tend to think you're right, and I tend to think this is one of those pivotal moments that we need. We need to readjust. I won't say change. Change is such a hard thing to do, even in spite of what George Bernard Shaw says. Change is definitely hard to do. However, if we can modify some of our actions, take a look at some of the things that come into our own household, understand that the use of everything from essential services that we've purchased, everything from lawn care to dry cleaning, has an impact. And if we can start to lessen those impacts, we can see that the earth does respond. Every time there's a lessening of something, we don't have to go very far. The reintroduction of shad along the Winnesaquatucket River. Why I said that terribly, but that river that flows around Providence, where shad and alewife and a lot of different fish species are returning, going upriver, upstream to spawn and live. That's only because we've cleaned up our rivers, and it's also because the industry has disappeared. But even because of that, even in spite of the disappearance of industries, because we've taken actions, whether it be on the individual level, the state level, the federal level, and maybe as a way of and I would really like your opinion on this. We need to be more politically active.
Absolutely.
Whatever party you subscribe to, and I really do mean that. Doesn't mean progressive or conservative, Democrat, Republican, independent, libertarian. Doesn't mean any of those things. Being politically active means that other people have a voice, and other people do need a voice. We've discovered in the environmental movement, particularly in the land trust movement, how difficult, how challenging to do the types of things we're doing without the input of people of color, of minorities or low income or whatever. We need those people. We want those desperately want those people in our land trusts and our conservation movements and our environmental movements. They bring a voice. They bring they bring an energy that is lacking on people who look like me, and we need that. We saw that in Providence along Allen's Avenue with the demise of that construction material transfer station. The number of trucks that were going up and down Allen's Avenue or going to go up and down Allen's Avenue, the amount of trash, the amount of dust, the amount of particulates and particulate matter that were coming out of those exhaust pipes of those diesel engine trucks. would continue to exasperate an already environmentally and socially a destructive area.
Um,
And it was appropriate for all of us to get involved in something like that, because it wasn't just a local issue, it was a statewide issue, just like any other issue in our state. I mean, we kind of live in the smallest state in the union, and anything we do impacts the rest of us. And so it was encouraging to see uh, all people of color, any color, at some of those meetings that dealt with that transfer station.
no,
But that's where we need to be statewide. We need to be that. I look around, and I'm sure you do this too, although you're much younger than I am. But when I go to land trust meetings or the annual summit down at URI, there's a sea of white-haired people all over the place. None of us are getting any younger. The
right.
younger generation is struggling with all the things that a younger generation has to offer. Everything from job security to paying the rent to now to dealing with expenses for tuition and all of those other issues, and they just don't have the time. So what's left? We need a younger generation. Through this celebration, through Earth Day, one of all of our goals must be the reintroduction or the introduction of youth, people younger than I am, to get into this movement. I got involved in my late 30s, and I've been involved ever since. Where
Well,
is the younger generation? Come on, guys. Come on, gals. Come on, fellow tree huggers. Let's
well,
get going.
well, to your point, there's an importance in assessing the younger urban population. The Alexander Kithis, for example, is a wonderful example of that. The Woonsocket city councilman, who actually I got to know through his because he published a blog about being an urban gardener. To your points, number one, the planet Earth has got incredible recuperative powers, and to the reemergence of heirloom fishes and sea and life in inner waterways is living testament to that. Number two, the need to get to your point about the city, the need to get urban buy-in is critical. We are now a majority minority state. We need to adjust to the political reality of that, the financial impact to the cities, and the fact that, quite frankly, there is as much, and it's surprising to many, and unfortunately we only got a couple minutes left, but this is a whole nother subject for a whole nother show, perhaps our next show. Sure. I believe that the front lines of environmental activism are actually now going to move back into the urban landscape because of the urgent need to redevelop that property, the sins that have been exposed as a result, the continuing, if you will, attack of environmental and economic racism because of places like Allen's Avenue, neighborhoods like South Providence being an easy host for the big newspaper, big media, big industry supported projects that they're willing to drop like an economic bomb. Remember that concept right in the middle of, because they are seen as marginalized and unable to fight them. I believe that the front lines, if you will, for environmental issues in Rhode Island are Providence, Pawtucket, West Warwick, cities like that, urban landscapes, sure. Which, to your point about whether it be solar power development, there is just incredible energy and incredible potential there, all brought to us because there's such a diverse community.
We need that diversity. So I invite all of you to check out Coalition Radio, Facebook, Twitter. I don't know what else is there. YouTube Live. Yep. I think we're going to do some Zoom things too.
Yep.
We've got a lot of shows. We got a lot of events coming up through the Burrillville Land Trust. We want to celebrate the 50th anniversary what do you give for a 50th anniversary? I forget. Is it gold or silver or something?
I'm pretty sure it's gold.
They're gold. So I don't want you to go mining. Don't go out and mine anything. No gold or anything. But celebrate however you can. Get out there, be safe, get online, join us for these. Be active. Don't be depressed. Don't give in to all of this nonsense that's going on, because we will overcome. We will do it. We will be there. And I know we will, because remember, 50 years ago, there were these small group of people who decided that, there's something awry here. And they got a Republican president and a Republican Congress to actually put some of these bills, these legislation, and made them national law. So it can be done. No matter if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, whatever you are, it can be done. It takes some hard work, and we can do it.
Absolutely. Paul, where can folks find the Burrillville Land Trust online?
Easiest thing is burrillvillelandtrust.org. There will be a list of events that looks just like this list. There it is, burrillvillelandtrust.org. We're also giving away a bagel, a place in town of Burrillville, right on beautiful Pasco, with every purchase, at a place called Pamphilio's. I'm giving a plug for her. She's a new caterer to our beautiful downtown Pasco, Rhode Island. Come in, buy something, and the Land Trust will give you a bagel. We only have 100 of them, so the first 100 people, and then after that, you're out of luck. So, but join us. But burrillvillelandtrust.org, Facebook, of course. We'll be on YouTube in a couple of days, and you can find us on Twitter as well.
Very good. Paul Roselli from the Burrillville Land Trust, burrillvillelandtrust.org. And, of course, he's all over Facebook. You'll find links to his organization on our page at facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. We're celebrating Earth Day, regardless of the circumstances, the surrounding, the sort of pall that's kind of hanging over Rhode Island and the world at large. We are hell-bent to continue the conversation, to celebrate our victories, and continue, if you will, our efforts to make not just Rhode Island, but the world literally a cleaner, safer place for literally our children. It is about the children in this case. I believe our generation is going to be the first one in a long time to hand to our children a planet that is cleaner in many ways than it was before. And that may be one of the few things that we do well. Paul Roselli,
great.
Thank you so
Pat.
much. Thanks, buddy.
Pleasure. Thank you.
We're going to take a very quick break right now for a few minutes, and we're going to go shift over to be carrying LPTV, an hour with the candidates. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Radio Network, facebook.com/thecoalitionradio.us, and on the mighty Twitter at _radio. We'll take a quick break right now. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes. Thank you.